woods are supposed to be peaceful, a place to disconnect from the world. No traffic, no crowds, no noise except the wind moving through the trees. But sometimes, being completely alone in the forest means there's nobody around to help you when something goes wrong. And the deeper you go into the wilderness, the easier it becomes for something, or someone, to stay hidden in the darkness around you. Tonight's video features 3 disturbing true-style horror stories about terrifying encounters deep in isolated forests, from mysterious strangers appearing at remote campsites, to abandoned fire lookout towers with someone lurking below, to a horrifying encounter on the Alaska highway that turned into a fight for survival. These stories will make you think twice before ever camping alone again, so turn off the lights, put on your headphones, and let's step into the woods. Back in 2019, when I was 21, I spent most of the summer living at my parents' house between semesters. Their property backed up into miles of dense forest, not the kind with hiking trails and signs either. I mean real woods, untouched areas where you could walk for hours without seeing another person. Growing up there, I used to wander through those forests constantly. Sometimes I'd stay out there all day fishing by creeks or building little camps with friends. So the woods never really scared me. If anything, they were familiar. Comforting even. That's probably why I underestimated what happened out there. One afternoon, completely on impulse, I decided I wanted to camp overnight. Nothing special, no big adventure. I just wanted a quiet night alone in nature before summer ended. I packed a backpack with basic gear, food, a flashlight, a sleeping bag, and a small tent. Before leaving, I casually told my parents I'd be camping somewhere behind the property and would be back the next morning. I headed out around 4 p.m. The weather was perfect. Warm air, clear skies, a slight breeze moving through the trees. The deeper I walked into the forest, the quieter the world became. No traffic, no voices, just birds and the sound of leaves shifting overhead. After hiking for about an hour, I found a nice clearing beside a fallen tree and decided to make camp there. It honestly looked like something out of a movie. Soft ground, tall trees surrounding the area. Enough open space for a small fire. I set up my tent, gathered sticks and firewood, and eventually got a small campfire going just as the sun started lowering behind the trees. Sitting beside that fire felt incredibly peaceful. The orange light flickering across the woods, the smell of smoke, the cold air starting to settle in. It was exactly the kind of quiet night I'd wanted. But that feeling didn't last long. The sun was almost gone when I first heard the voice. At first I thought I imagined it. It sounded distant, a man quietly talking somewhere deeper in the woods. The sound echoed strangely between the trees, making it impossible to tell what direction it came from. I stopped moving and listened carefully. The voice continued, low, muttering, like someone speaking under their breath while walking. Immediately, something about it felt wrong. These woods were huge. There weren't trails around here. Nobody randomly wandered this deep unless they specifically meant to. Still, I tried being rational. Maybe another camper got lost. Maybe someone was hiking nearby, so I ignored it at first. But after several minutes, the voice still hadn't faded away. That's what started bothering me. If the person was simply passing through, the sound should have moved farther away. Instead, it felt like they were staying near me. Circling, maybe. I kept staring into the trees, trying to spot movement, but the fading sunlight created dark shadows everywhere. Every branch looked like a person standing still. Finally, I called out, "Hello?" The second I spoke, the voice stopped, completely. No response, no footsteps, nothing. The silence afterward felt horrible, like the entire forest had frozen. I waited several seconds before calling out again, louder this time. Still nothing. At that point, the peaceful atmosphere was gone. I suddenly became very aware of how isolated I really was. No cell service, no nearby houses. Nobody would hear me if something happened out there. And honestly, I didn't want to spend the whole night sitting beside a fire wondering if some stranger was watching me from the trees. So I made the decision to move campsites. Fast. Within minutes, I packed everything back into my bag and headed deeper into the woods, trying to find another spot before darkness fully settled in. Unfortunately, I waited too long. The sunlight disappeared quicker than I expected. The deeper I walked, the harder it became to see anything. Eventually, after maybe 15 or 20 minutes, I gave up trying to find a perfect clearing and just settled between clusters of trees. Honestly, it barely even felt like a campsite. Just a random patch of forest floor. By the time I got my tent back up, the woods were pitch black. Everything felt different now. The trees looked taller. The darkness felt heavier. And every little sound seemed amplified. Still, I tried calming myself down. I rebuilt the fire, made a few s'mores, sat there listening to the wood crackle while trying to convince myself I was overthinking things. And for a while, it actually worked. Hours passed. The fire burned lower. The fear slowly faded. Eventually, sometime after midnight, I started letting the flames die out before heading into the tent. That's when I heard leaves crunch behind me, not far away either, maybe 20 feet into the trees. I froze immediately. The sound stopped the second I turned around. Beyond the firelight was complete darkness. I couldn't see anything. My heart started pounding again. I stared into the woods for several seconds before finally calling out, "Who's there?" For a moment, nothing happened. Then a man slowly stepped into the edge of the firelight. What startled me most was that he came from a completely different direction than where I heard the noise. He looked maybe mid-30s, thin build, dark jacket, messy hair, and despite appearing out of nowhere in isolated woods after midnight, he acted completely relaxed, like this was normal. "Didn't mean to scare you," he said casually with a smile. Before I could even answer, he walked straight toward the fire and sat beside it, warming his hands. I remember just staring at him. The confidence he had immediately felt wrong. He acted too comfortable, like he already belonged there. Can I help you?" I asked nervously. The man looked at me for a second, then calmly said, "No, just that. No explanation, no introduction, nothing." The answer made my stomach tighten immediately. We sat there silently for several awkward seconds while the fire cracked between us. I kept trying to think of a way to get him to leave without escalating things. Then, without thinking, I asked something I instantly regretted. "Were you the one I heard talking near my first campsite earlier?" The man's expression changed instantly. His smile disappeared. His face went completely blank, and without even looking at me, he quietly said, "Must have been somebody else." But the way he said it, cold, emotionless, almost irritated, made every instinct in my body start screaming that something was seriously wrong. Before I could say anything else, a stick snapped somewhere behind me, close, very close. I slowly turned my head toward the sound, and my stomach dropped. Someone else was out there. I couldn't see them, but I knew they were there. The man by the fire didn't even react. That scared me more than anything, because it meant he expected it. I turned back toward him. He was staring directly at me now, completely expressionless, not smiling anymore, just watching me with these dead, empty eyes that honestly didn't feel human. Every survival instinct in my body kicked in at once. I jumped to my feet and sprinted straight into the woods without saying another word. Behind me, I heard one of the men suddenly yell something. Then footsteps exploded through the leaves behind me. Someone was chasing me. I ran as fast as I possibly could through the darkness, branches slamming against my arms and face. I nearly tripped several times. The only reason I managed to navigate it all was because I'd spent years wandering those woods growing up. Eventually, after what felt like forever, the footsteps behind me stopped, but I didn't stop running. Not until I finally reached the road near my parents' house. I burst through the front door completely out of breath and terrified. My parents immediately knew something was wrong. We called 911. The next morning, officers went back with me to where I'd camped, but when we reached the site, everything was gone. The fire pit had been scattered, no footprints, no trash, nothing, almost like nobody had ever been there. And honestly, that made it even worse, because it confirmed one thing for me. Those men never accidentally stumbled across my campsite. They were there intentionally, waiting, and if I hadn't trusted my instincts and run when I did, I honestly don't know if I would have made it back out of those woods alive. A few years ago, I became obsessed with the idea of spending several nights alone in one of those old fire lookout towers hidden deep in the mountains. I've always loved isolated places. The farther away from people, roads, and civilization something was, the more interested I became in it. So when one of my friends mentioned that certain retired fire lookouts could actually be rented out by hikers, I immediately started researching them. Most of them were incredibly remote. Old ranger towers built decades ago in places where there was almost nothing around for miles. Exactly the kind of place I wanted. After scrolling through listings for a while, I found one that stood out immediately, mostly because almost nobody seemed to rent it. There were barely any pictures, no recent reviews. The only image was this old, blurry photo showing a tiny weathered tower sitting alone on top of a mountain ridge surrounded by forest. It honestly looked abandoned. According to the description, the tower had been built sometime in the 1950s and was accessible only through a 6-hour hike deep into the wilderness. No electricity, no running water, no ranger nearby, nothing, just isolation. I booked 3 nights there without thinking twice. About a week later, I packed my hiking gear into a large backpack and started the trip early in the morning. The hike was brutal, not beautiful scenic hiking trail brutal either, just exhausting. The trail was barely maintained. Certain sections were almost impossible to follow because plants and fallen branches had overtaken the path. The deeper I got into the woods, the quieter the world became. No cars, no people, not even birds after a while. Just wind moving through trees. At some points, I genuinely felt like I was the only person left alive out there. Around the 5th hour of hiking, I finally saw the lookout tower in the distance. It sat on top of a ridge overlooking miles of forest below. Even from far away, something about it looked unsettling, small, lonely, like it didn't belong there anymore. Another hour later, I finally reached it. The tower itself was in rough shape. The wood looked old and faded from decades of storms and winters. Unlike modern fire lookouts, this one wasn't very tall. It was more like a small cabin raised maybe 15 feet above the ground with a wraparound staircase leading to the top. Every step creaked loudly beneath my boots as I climbed up. The inside was almost completely empty. Dusty floorboards, old shelves, windows covering every wall, no locks, no decorations, no signs anyone had stayed there recently. Still, the view was unbelievable. You could see mountains stretching endlessly into the horizon, entire valleys swallowed by forests. At sunset, the sky turned deep orange behind the ridges, and for a while, sitting there alone honestly felt peaceful. Like I'd escaped the rest of the world. I cooked food on a tiny camping stove and sat outside on the walkway listening to the wind blow through the trees far below. It was quiet in a way I'd never experienced before. Not peaceful quiet either, heavy quiet. The kind where every tiny sound suddenly feels important. Eventually, darkness settled over the mountains, and once the sun disappeared completely, the isolation hit me all at once. There were no lights anywhere, no roads visible, no houses, no signs of life. Just darkness covering miles and miles of wilderness. I laid my sleeping bag out on the wooden floor and tried to sleep around 8:30, but despite being exhausted from the hike, I couldn't fully relax. The tower constantly creaked in the wind, the wood shifted every few minutes, and every sound echoed through the empty structure. At some point, maybe 40 minutes after laying down, I heard footsteps outside. At first, I thought the tower itself was moving in the wind. Then I heard it again. Creak, creak, creak. Slow footsteps climbing the staircase. Every hair on my arms instantly stood up. I sat frozen listening as the steps slowly got closer. There was absolutely no reason for anyone else to be out there, especially not after dark. I grabbed my flashlight and stood near the doorway just as someone appeared around the corner of the walkway. It was a man, late 40s maybe, tall, thin, long, dirty blonde hair, worn outdoor clothes. What unsettled me immediately wasn't how he looked. It was how calm he looked, almost like he expected me to be there. "Beautiful place, isn't it?" he said casually while stepping closer. I awkwardly agreed, trying not to sound nervous. The man slowly looked around the inside of the tower before smiling. "Thought I'd stay here tonight," he said. The comment immediately made my stomach tighten. I explained that I had rented the lookout for the next 3 nights. The man stared at me silently for several seconds. Then he glanced around the room again. "Well," he said slowly, "looks like there's enough space for 2 people." The way he said it made my skin crawl. It didn't sound like a joke. It sounded like he was testing me. I quickly lied and told him a friend of mine was hiking up later that night, that we were staying there together. The man's expression changed immediately. Not angry exactly, more disappointed, like I'd ruined some kind of plan. After several uncomfortable seconds, he nodded and turned toward the stairs. That's when I noticed something strange. He had no backpack, no camping supplies, no food, nothing, which made absolutely no sense. Nobody hikes 6 hours into remote wilderness at night without gear, especially not someone expecting to sleep outside. I watched him disappear down the staircase and vanish into the darkness below. For the next several hours, I stayed awake, listening carefully for sounds outside.
Every creak of the tower made my chest tighten.
Eventually, though, exhaustion won. I fell asleep. The next morning, sunlight pouring through the windows woke me up. For a little while, everything felt normal again. I even started convincing myself I'd overreacted. Maybe the guy was just weird. Maybe he had a nearby campsite somewhere I hadn't seen. But when I climbed downstairs, I froze immediately. Attached to the wooden railing near the bottom of the staircase was a piece of paper. On it, written in messy handwriting, was a single word. Sorry. Just seeing that made my stomach drop, because it meant he came back during the night while I was asleep, and I never heard him. I immediately scanned the woods around the tower looking for movement. Nothing, just trees swaying in the wind. For the next hour, I walked around the surrounding forest trying to see if there were signs of another campsite nearby. But I found absolutely nothing. No tent, no fire pit, no supplies, no footprints. It honestly felt like the guy simply appeared out of the woods and disappeared back into them. That second night, I became far more cautious. I kept my lantern on inside the tower and stayed awake much later, watching the darkness below through the windows. And the longer I stared into those woods, the more it felt like someone was staring back at me. Around midnight, I finally decided to go outside quickly before trying to sleep. I grabbed my lantern and headed down the staircase toward the tree line. The forest below the tower was pitch black except for the weak glow from my lantern. The second I reached the edge of the trees, I saw movement. Something shifted just beyond the light. I froze instantly. "Hello?" I called out. No answer, but I knew somebody was there. Every instinct in my body screamed it. I backed away slowly before suddenly turning and running back toward the lookout. The tower didn't even feel safe anymore. The windows covered every wall. The door had no lock, and with the lantern on inside, anyone outside could probably see me perfectly, while I could barely see anything beyond the glass. I started packing my gear immediately. At least if something happened, I wanted to be ready to run. Every 30 seconds, I stopped packing and checked the staircase outside through the window. Nothing. Then finally, while looking through the railings, I saw him. The man was standing motionless at the bottom of the stairs, staring up at the tower. He wasn't moving, wasn't calling out, just standing there in complete silence, watching. I honestly think I stood frozen at that window for almost 2 minutes. Then slowly, the man stepped backward into the darkness and disappeared into the trees again. That was enough for me. I didn't care how dangerous hiking out at night was anymore. I grabbed my backpack, shut off the lantern, and quietly left the tower. Walking away from that place into the pitch-black forest was one of the most terrifying things I've ever done. Every sound behind me made me think the man was following. I kept my pocket knife open in my hand the entire time. The hike through the darkness lasted hours, and not once during that walk did I stop feeling watched. By sunrise, I finally reached the trailhead and got out of those woods. To this day, I still think about that man. Especially one detail. I told him I rented the tower for 3 nights, meaning he knew exactly how long I planned to stay there, and yet he kept coming back, again and again, almost like he was waiting for something. A few summers ago, I decided to drive the Alaska Highway alone. It had always been one of those bucket list trips for me. Miles of wilderness, mountains, remote highways stretching through Canada into Alaska. I converted the back of my SUV into a small camping setup with a mattress, storage bins, food supplies, and enough gear to survive comfortably for a couple months on the road. The entire plan was simple. Drive north slowly, camp along the way, explore as much wilderness as possible. For the first few days, the trip was incredible. The scenery honestly didn't even look real half the time. Massive mountain ranges, dense forests, fog rolling through valleys early in the morning. There were long stretches where I wouldn't see another vehicle for 20 or 30 minutes. But that isolation also came with a strange feeling. You start realizing how vulnerable you really are out there. No signal, no nearby towns, no quick help if something goes wrong. And because I had to pass through Canada, I couldn't legally bring the firearm I normally kept with me on road trips. That bothered me more than I expected. Still, the first day went smoothly. I drove nearly 8 hours before finally pulling into a small wooded campsite sometime after sunset. It wasn't an official campground, just one of those dirt pull-offs hidden beside the highway where travelers occasionally stop for the night. I parked, covered my windows, climbed into the back of the SUV, and fell asleep almost immediately. Nothing happened that night. No strange sounds, no people, no problems. The next morning, I woke up feeling rested and decided to stretch my legs before driving again. Near the campsite, I noticed a narrow trail leading deeper into the woods, so I followed it for a few minutes. After maybe a 5-minute walk, I stumbled across another campsite farther back in the forest, and instantly something about it felt wrong. The place looked abandoned, but recently abandoned. Camping gear was scattered everywhere, a ripped sleeping bag, broken supplies. A cooler tipped over on its side, one of the folding chairs had snapped in half. It honestly looked less like someone packed up and left, and more like they fled in a hurry. I stood there maybe 30 seconds before my instincts started screaming at me to leave. So I turned around immediately and headed back toward my SUV. But when I returned to the campsite, there was now another vehicle parked beside mine. A black pickup truck, dark tinted windows, engine off, nobody visible inside. My stomach tightened immediately. Out there, in the middle of nowhere, seeing another vehicle suddenly appear beside mine without hearing it arrive felt deeply unsettling. I walked toward my SUV, slowly trying to act calm, but every instinct told me someone inside that truck was watching me. The strange thing was, nobody ever got out. The truck just sat there silently. I got into my SUV immediately and left without wasting another second. For the next several hours, I tried convincing myself I was overreacting. The truck was probably just another traveler. The destroyed campsite probably had a normal explanation, but deep down, something still felt wrong. Around midday, I finally stopped at a tiny gas station along the highway. Calling it a gas station honestly felt generous. It was basically one old building with a single pump sitting beside the road surrounded by mountains and forest. No other vehicles were there. No employees visible either. I started filling my tank while admiring the scenery around me. Despite everything earlier, the trip still felt surreal in the best way. Then I saw headlights approaching down the highway. As the vehicle got closer, my stomach dropped. It was the same black truck. I recognized it immediately. Same dark windows, same damaged front grille. The truck slowly pulled into the station and parked directly on the opposite side of the pump from me. Again, nobody got out. The engine stayed running. I remember trying to casually glance through the windshield, but the tint was too dark to see anything inside. At that point, the coincidence started feeling impossible. Out on roads this isolated, you naturally cross paths with the same vehicles sometimes. But something about the way the truck behaved felt deliberate, like it was watching me, waiting. The second my tank finished filling, I got back into my SUV and left immediately. For the next several hours, I drove non-stop. I wanted distance between myself and that truck. Eventually, as evening approached, I found another hidden campsite farther off the highway. This one felt safer. The narrow dirt trail leading to it was partially hidden by brush, and there were no signs anyone had been there recently. I seriously considered setting up my tent outside. But after the black truck incidents, something in me told me to stay inside the vehicle instead. So I cooked dinner beside the SUV, watched the sunset through the trees, and eventually climbed into the back to relax for the night. At first, everything felt peaceful again. I watched downloaded videos on my phone for a few hours and honestly started feeling stupid for being so paranoid earlier. Then, around 11 p.m., I heard footsteps outside. Not an animal, not branches moving, human footsteps, crunching leaves, slowly circling the SUV. Every muscle in my body instantly locked up. I sat perfectly still listening. The footsteps moved closer, then suddenly stopped right beside the vehicle. Before I could even react, a face appeared pressed against the side window beside me. I nearly screamed. The man's face was only inches away from the glass, staring directly inside. I couldn't make out many details in the darkness, just pale skin, wide eyes, and the outline of a hood. Then the face vanished back into the darkness. Adrenaline exploded through my body. I jumped into the front seat as another man suddenly sprinted toward the SUV from the trees. A second later, crash. The back window shattered. Glass flew across the inside of the vehicle. One of the men reached through the broken window trying to unlock the door from the inside while the other ran toward the driver's side. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely get the keys into the ignition. For a terrifying second, I genuinely thought I wasn't going to start the car in time. Then finally, the engine turned over. I slammed the SUV into drive and floored it out of the campsite. As I sped down the dirt trail, my headlights briefly illuminated the trees nearby. And that's when I saw the black truck hidden in the bushes off the side of the trail. They had followed me there. The realization hit me so hard it almost made me sick. This wasn't random. They'd been tracking me since the first campsite. I drove several miles before finally stopping to close the shattered back door and call the police with the little signal I had. But out there, response times were slow. By the time officers eventually searched the area, the men in the truck were long gone. I never got a plate number, never saw their faces clearly. And honestly, I didn't want to know what they planned to do if they got inside that SUV. Because people don't follow someone for hundreds of miles through isolated wilderness just to rob them. Even now, years later, I still think about that black truck sometimes. And every time I do, I remember one terrifying thought. If I had decided to sleep outside in a tent that night instead of staying in the SUV, I probably wouldn't be here telling this story. And those were 3 disturbing true horror stories about being completely alone in the woods. Stories where help was miles away, where one wrong decision could have ended everything, and where trusting your instincts may have been the only reason these people survived. The scariest part about stories like these is knowing how easily they could happen to anyone. A quiet camping trip, a remote hiking trail, an isolated roadside campsite. Places that feel peaceful during the day can become something entirely different once the sun goes down. So next time you find yourself deep in the wilderness, pay attention to that feeling in your gut. Because sometimes, your instincts notice danger long before your mind does. If you enjoyed tonight's video, make sure to leave a like, subscribe, and turn on notifications for more true scary stories uploaded every week. And if you have your own creepy experience in the woods, late at night, or while camping alone, feel free to share it in the comments below. Stay safe out there, and I'll see you in the next story.